Welcome to Transcending Comics, a podcast dedicated to trans representation in comic books, manga, and webtoons, both on panel and behind the scenes. I'm your host, Tommy, and joining me today is an exciting newcomer to the world of writing comics. They're the writer of the new all-ages Power Rangers comic book series, Ranger Academy, which has already had an incredibly strong first 2 issues. They're also an established writer in the world of young adult novels, and they've written some of my favorite queer YA characters I've read so far. Their debut novel, Fragile Remedy, was selected as a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection, and their latest novel, The Immeasurable Depth of You, has been highly praised by Kirkus, Booklist, and Publishers Weekly. Here to discuss their first foray into the world of comics is today's guest, Maria Ingrande Mora.
Hi, Tommy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Now, for those of my audience that aren't already Power Ranger diehards like myself, what can you tell us about Ranger Academy?
Ranger Academy is a great intro, honestly, to anyone. So regardless of whether or not they're a super fan or they kind of, would recognize the costumes on Halloween if they saw them and don't know anything else, because we are joining Ranger Academy through the eyes of Sage, a young girl who has grown up on an isolated moon. She doesn't know what a Power Ranger even is. So we're able to follow her footsteps and go to school with her and learn alongside her. So you really don't need to know the lore. That said, I think that longtime fans are going to be really excited by Easter eggs and cameos and just a new take on sort of how one becomes a Power Ranger. It really hasn't been depicted this way in the past. So I think that that's going to be a lot of fun. And for me, as an 80s kid, who grew up watching the show, it's really fun to recapture, for me, the magic that I felt coming home from school and turning on the TV. And that would be, what was on. And it was actually, for me, an introduction. In a way, I'm a huge anime and manga fan. Mm-hmm. And in a way, though I didn't know it at the time, it was kind of an introduction to that style of storytelling and monsters and design as well.
I feel like this is one of the first forays into Power Rangers we've seen that have such a strong departure from the requirement of not just stock footage, but also the show's reliance on stock footage. Since, we haven't really seen a morphed Ranger yet in the book. And so I feel like I'm reading something totally fresh and something I haven't seen from the series before. So I'm not even mad that it's probably going to be a minute before we see any of our main characters morph. This feels so new.
That's a good point. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you see it. It's so hard to avoid spoilers. I'm new at this with something that's coming out ongoing, but that was actually for Joe the artist and I, and honestly my editor as well, Daphne Plebin, who has been editing Rangers books for 15 years now. A lot of the fun was being able to redesign the uniforms. What does a morphed Ranger look like in this iteration? And because Ranger Academy does exist a little bit out of space and time, it's kind of the TARDIS of schools. It does allow us to really play with concurrent timelines or folks coming in from different Rangers teams throughout the whole canon. And I think that that's going to be exciting for readers. It's very fun for me as a writer to have such a rich canon to draw from and to be able to collaborate with an editor who is like a walking encyclopedia of Power Rangers.
So how did you make this leap from YA novels to writing monthly comics now?
Boom Studios reached out to me after taking a look at Fragile Remedy. And felt that the tone kind of, even though Fragile Remedy is a bit darker and the protagonist is a little bit older, they connected with the tone and asked me if I wanted to take on an original series, which would involve, for me, creating all the new characters. And I think that that's why they were looking at someone maybe who had not written comics before, although I was a big comics reader, and that did help. I grew up on the X-Men runs in the 90s. They were literally everything to me. And so it did feel like stepping back into a form of media that was really important to me as a young person. And but I will say the learning curve is something else, because writing a script is very different from writing prose. And I actually love writing dialogue, though. So the dialogue is very easy for me. It's the blocking of the panels and whatnot that I had a bit of a learning curve. And happy to say that it's much faster for me now. Now that I'm many issues in, it feels I got the muscle memory down.
Now, I've heard you mention elsewhere that you have a couple written works that are in varying states of completion that haven't been published yet. In the realm of comics, do you have anything similar? Like, have you ever tried your hand writing comic scripts before this?
No, not since I was in middle school. So it's been a minute. No, I had not written any comic scripts before. I write YA, kind of exclusively. I have worked on some middle grade manuscripts that are not finished. But my next book, which will be out in 2025, A Wild Flame Rises, is also YA. So I've kind of stayed in that realm. I think Ranger Academy is a bit on the edge between middle grade and YA. In a YA novel, you would not have a 13-year-old protagonist, but you can play fast and loose in comics. So while Sage is 13, I think that it does get into kind of YA zone in terms of maybe it's slightly darker at times than you would see a middle grade novel be.
Now, I've also heard you mention that especially during the pandemic, you were kind of dabbling back into reading fan fiction. Is that still something you dabble in at all?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I'm like, where did you hear me mention this? Ooh, now we're going there. Yeah, no, absolutely. Being fanish has been part of my life since before I had a framework or understanding of what that meant. I used to write handwritten X-Files fic in 1992. We're like predating the internet here. And I remember downloading a Labyrinth fan fiction, somewhere in the 90s, and I thought it was like an official tie-in. I'm like, great, a sequel, printing it on a dot matrix printer so I can go read it in my backyard. So yeah, I think that transformative works, first of all, I think transformative works are so important. I think that comics are very adjacent to transformative works. When you have a new writer come on and take on IP, and this is not meant to be a dig on any writer, but in a way you are writing fan fiction, you are a fan, and you're drawing on existing lore and you're drawing on folks' understanding of characters and their relationships. And I think that's what, authors of transformative works, including artists, vitters, everybody who's kind of piggybacking off of something and creating is part of that. And I think that's why I think you see so often pro writers, if they're willing to admit it, have grown up reading or writing or engaging in some way in fan spaces. I think it teaches you a lot. I think that you are able to access readership and beta readers and kind of learn and grow your craft in a way that's really safe, and it's untethered from capitalism. So, making art under capitalism is not fun. Hopefully for most people, making art in that fan space is more fun. And I think that the joy is so important. If you go into trying to write professionally to make money from the start, you have not tapped into joy. And I think that that's probably a rougher path. And I think it leads to more burnout and disappointment. If you're just like first and foremost having fun, I don't know. I think it's more sustainable.
Now, with this being your first licensed property you're working on, have you ever checked out the world of Power Rangers fan fiction, or do you feel the need to stay away from that to avoid any inspiration?
It's not even, I would, if I had the impulse, I would actually stay away, just like I actually don't look at Twitter or anywhere where folks are speculating about Ranger Academy, because I don't want to be influenced in any way, negatively, positively, in any way at all. So no, I haven't really looked at Rangers fandom, but I assume it's out there and that it's thriving. And I imagine that I'm trying to think of a comparable fandom, but when you just have a ton of characters, you have a ton of ships. So good for them. I bet there's a lot of ships sailing out there in the Power Rangers fan world. And to that end, I wish I could become another person for a second and see what folks eventually will be hopefully making transformative works about Ranger Academy, because I'm a creator who hopes that folks have just take it and run in a million different directions. And I also don't want to ever confirm or push people away from ships that they may have in the world that I'm creating. And not to make it all about relationships, but I know that that's just happens to be, one strong element of how folks create transformative works. But there are panels or moments where in the back of my mind, I'm like, somebody could take this and run with it. I don't know where they're going to go, but I hope they have a good time. The significant look that was exchanged between two characters. What does it mean? It's up to you.
Now, as far as pairings go, I know that Fragile Remedy had a soundtrack that you kind of paired with it. Does Ranger Academy have its own soundtrack as well?
It doesn't. And I think once it does, it will be very character specific, because I feel like Sage has kind of her own vibe, and her friends, Lindy and Theo, also have their own vibe. Mathis has their own vibe. Tula has her own vibe. I almost imagine like I could put together character playlists because their personalities are all so different. When I make a playlist, it is often around some thread of romance or like a strong ship or pairing. And so Ranger Academy has been actually a lot of fun for me. That it's about friendship relationships. There's a lot of strong platonic bonds in every direction. And I do think there's a bit of romance if you know where to look, but it's not the central plot.
Now, one thing I've noticed in your novels especially, but also in just the first 2 issues of Ranger Academy, is that I've never felt like you're writing down to your reader. And I mean, like with your novels handling like really serious subjects for young readers like mental health, suicide, and addiction, like that's been really impressive to me. And with Ranger Academy too, like when I heard kind of more of an all ages or like younger audience focused Ranger book was coming out, I'm like, well, I'm going to buy it, yes, but like, is this going to be like the Marvel and DC books that are made for kids? And like, just, I know kid me would have cared for this, but no, even as adult, I'm really enjoying Ranger Academy so far. So like, how do you go about that? Like avoiding writing down to your target audience?
There's a little bit of me calling my editor and going, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And Daphna's never said no. She'll even push me sometimes because I'll be like, I don't know, is this too dark? And she's like, do it, dude. Yeah, I don't talk down to young people. I think for those of us who can remember being 13, we felt like adults at the time. We were able to find and access adult stuff, whether that was sneaking into an R-rated movie or whatever. I don't think that people that age are particularly sheltered, and they can smell being condescended to from 500 miles away. And I wasn't here, to write for third graders. I think that younger readers will be able to enjoy it. I think that when we get into darker moments or themes, the resonance of it may go over younger readers' heads. But I think some themes are also universal to whether or not you're a young adult or an adult, and that is feeling out of place, feeling insecure, feeling not enough. Those are themes that I think pop up in all of my writing, and you will certainly see that in Ranger Academy. It's kind of it's the heart of the story is so far that in issues 1 and 2, Sage is a full outsider. She doesn't know if she belongs here for many different reasons. And to me, that is something that we feel as middle school aged people, but I'm in my 40s, and there are many times where I feel in some social situation or another, I'm like, I just do not belong here. And I think that's also why, there's queerness in everything that I write. I don't think that I can separate that from myself or my lens and how I move through the world. But there is also, I think, something inherently queer about being in a space and not being sure if you belong there. But also, once you find your people, they are your people. They're your ride or dies. And that's why I wanted friendship to be extremely central to the story of Ranger Academy, both the backstory that will slowly develop and Sage's story in our current timeline. The root of that is the strong bonds that we form with the people who we care about. And that's Rangers, right? It's team-based stories. I've always been more drawn to, let's say, like generalize it as superheroes, but I love a team. I loved the X-Men. I prefer a team to like a solitary individual superhero always, because it's about where we support each other, where their strengths and weaknesses. It's about friction. I think things are so boring when everyone gets along. So even though Sage is going to have these new friendships, she never had a friend. Her friends were like alien goats. So she's navigating friendships for the first time, but it's not all smooth sailing. You're going to have fights with your friends. You're going to accidentally hurt them. I think that's one of the worst things you can experience as a young person, is hurting somebody that you care about. And we've all done it. And it's that kind of thing, I guess, I hope is not talking down, because it's the truth. It's what happens, as you're navigating life at that age.
Now, on the note of queerness or queer elements in the book, you right away introduced what I believe is the first seemingly human non-binary character in the world of Power Rangers with Mathis. I know this is your first time writing a non-binary character with like an active role in the story. Mm-hmm. So like, as a queer person yourself, like what do you do to make sure you're like representing us well when you do that?
Well, first of all, I would never say that I did it right. Here's the correct way for a non-binary person to present or act or be reacted to, even within, let's say, non-binary people as a group. It was like the least monolithic possible because we are non-binary. And I identify as genderqueer. I tend to kind of fall into like masc and femme seasons of my life. And that's very different than Mathis, who is just doing their thing. And kind of is, my understanding of Mathis, and I know that sounds wild because they're in my head, but I always feel like I'm in an interview with my own characters, trying to get to know them and trying to see, what sticks and how they respond to things. But Mathis is very secure in their identity and how they present. They're pretty confident. And I cannot wait for y'all to meet their family a little ways down the road. I think that that's going to be a fun little reveal, and also revealing, to me, when you know that someone has been affirmed their whole life, I think that speaks to who Mathis is, and that Mathis has been able to be accepted within their family unit in a way that then when you go to school, you're like, nobody can stop me now. My family has already affirmed me and made me feel confident. But that being said, I don't think that because I use they, them pronouns and I'm genderqueer that I could say like, yeah, I did it perfect. I'm always open to criticism and feedback. And it's really just, I don't know, Mathis is Mathis. I hope that they resonate with people. It was very important to me before I agreed to do this project that I would have free reign with, I don't want to say diversity because it just feels like that word doesn't mean anything anymore. But I was like, this book's going to be queer. So are you cool with that? And there was never, ever any pushback whatsoever. And so I really appreciate that I have that opportunity. And also that it isn't just, okay, Mathis is there. So now this is a diverse Power Rangers book or something. I think that young people's identities can be really fluid, and that you can read Ranger Academy and maybe relate to different folks, maybe being on the ACE spectrum or maybe being queer in a way that I'm not going to be explicit about on the page. Because at that age, you're not always sure about yourself or communicating it. And it was important to me that young readers especially see something in themselves, even if it wasn't explicit on the page. Like they're kind of catching a vibe. I'm kind of catching a vibe here, but I don't know. Am I not? But I think especially for characters on the ACE spectrum, that we have all found someone that we identified with, and maybe the author didn't even mean for that to be the case, but you're like, okay, I'm vibing with you. And that's sort of the fluidity that I wanted to be, in the story.
I'm excited to hear that we'll be getting a bit of backstory from Mathis and seeing that explored more, since like, I remember there was big news last time that like a non-binary ranger was allegedly introduced, and I was kind of let down when they were an alien from kind of a collective consciousness species and a zombie, and I'm like, okay, well, by this metric, isn't like Alpha 5 the first non-binary character if we're taking this? So yeah, I was glad to see you taking charge right away, and I really did like how it was just addressed very matter-of-factly with the like correction of pronouns, moved on. And like, I know there's not a ton of representation for us in licensed comics yet, but yeah, just seeing the trans issue dealt with that quickly, I was surprised to see it done so well this first time around.
I'm really happy to hear that. I wanted Ryan Sage's dad to not even blink. He's corrected, he moves on, and he's never going to misgender Mathis again. So I didn't want to add to the friction of this world, to add, folks misgendering a character or not being chill with it. Like, we're literally going to school that exists outside of space and time. If you can figure that out, you can figure someone's gender out and their pronouns out. And so that was that was important to me. Mathis and Tula, being older, a few years older than Sage and her friends, are more kind of supporting mentor characters. And my only hope is that folks aren't disappointed that Mathis isn't kind of on every single page, but they're there and because they're Tula's best friend and they have their own very unique and special friendship. It's a big part of the story, but I wanted to have those older characters. I don't know about you, but like when I was 13, somebody who was 15 or 16 was like a full adult. I was like, oh my God, they're so smart and they know everything and they're so cool. And that's kind of who I wanted Sage to also have older people in her life, that because she's never had friends. She's never had an older person to sort of have that like, wow, that's starry-eyed, like, you know everything, you're so wise. And that's kind of the role that I think that Mathis and Tula have in Sage's life.
So you've mentioned that you were an 80s kid and have some childhood like history with the franchise. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what your relationship to the show has been and like any particular series that have appealed to you over the years?
The original series is the only one that I have watched. So that's just my truth. I get really anxious doing interviews that it's going to be like, oh, they're not a real Power Rangers fan. But the truth is, I think that having a fresh perspective on the story is where we're landing and how we get Ranger Academy. But I loved Tommy, of course. I feel like there was like a universal crush happening there. I used to read the summaries of episodes in like TV Guide. I'm really dating myself. No. Kids, there used to be a thing called TV Guide at the grocery store. My mom would let me pick up the TV Guide at the grocery store, and then you would get like the summaries of upcoming shows or whatever. It was like 3 sentences, and I would look up X-Files, the X-Men, the animated series, Power Rangers, things like that, just to see if it looked like that episode would be interesting to me. And I think anyone who's read my books can probably guess that I really like high stakes moments. Somebody's getting hurt. Everyone needs to save them. Like, huge theme in my writing is like kind of that threat, a threat to someone, and like how they respond to folks worrying about them or caring about them. When you take that, and you bring in really high stakes, that was kind of always what I was looking for. I think that along with like the whole world, I just thought that Rita was really sexy and cool, and campy as hell. And looking back, I'm like, oh, you can kind of draw a line from Rita Repulsa to drag in a way, the camp of it all. And as a huge fan of drag, I kind of lived in a drag bar in college. There was a moment where I was like, oh my God. Oh, you like make those connections. I'm like, Rita had a very queer vibe, spiritually. And so I really loved the villains. And that's sort of the dichotomy of like, we're just teens doing teen stuff. And like, oh, now we got to fight a monster. I liked that too, because the allegory to me is like, everything feels like the end of the world when you're a teenager. Like a math test feels like the end of the world. So the end of the world feeling like the end of the world is something I think that resonates. So that resonated with me. I thought that at the time, I was like, these are pretty corny, these stock footage fights. So there's also kind of like the giggling at that and enjoying it. And now looking back, I have so much affection for it. And also the ingenuity of being like, yeah, we're going to do a whole nother show with this other show. And look where it's gotten us. I mean, I just think it's so cool that it's so enduring. I see little Power Ranger trick-or-treaters every year. I don't even know if the kids know what they are. Do they? I have no idea. My best friends in college, from college, they have younger children and they're huge Power Rangers fans. They finally think I'm cool because I'm writing Ranger Academy, but they've worn Power Ranger costumes. And so I think it's neat. I do think it's neat that it is so enduring. And I think there's something gentle in a way about Power Rangers. There's something innocent about that idea of having your alter ego, but your alter ego just needs to be around their friends in order to do good things and fight evil. I think that's really sweet.
Yeah, I deeply resonate with that TV Guide point since, well, I grew up with the internet. I didn't grow up with the internet that was like capable of streaming episodes or handling videos without waiting all day for something to buffer. So when I found TV tropes and like a whole list of descriptions of every episode of the series, I spent like a summer reading every single one of those.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I think it's really easy to be fanish on the internet now.
Mhm.
Everything is there. We had to be really scrappy and like go to the library. I had to go to an internet cafe. I was also a big Star Wars fan as a younger person. And I had a job, and I would use all my money for my job to go to an internet cafe and like buy minutes so that I could read early wiki entries about Star Wars novels and stuff like that. And so I love that it's easier now. There's no part of me that's like, you kids have it so great. I'm like, good for you. Great. We all deserve to disassociate about the things that we love. Should be easy.
Now, the series, I've noticed, kind of introduces the like different houses aspect of a lot of young adult media, with the different chroma campuses, with each one modeled off a different ranger color. I'm curious what you're like modeling the archetypes for these campuses off of. Like, is this all just the original colors and their dynamics, or are you pulling from other things?
I've been really lucky to have a collaborative relationship with Hasbro and Boom on that, because I couldn't just come in and go, red means this now, according to Maria Ingrande Mora. So there is an existing bit of a framework. It's not set in stone, but I was able to look at that framework and then say, if you were to, I love astrology. So for me, it's like really light. Like if you were a Taurus, maybe you're a little bit stubborn, but also this, like I wanted to leave it very, very high level, because I don't like the idea, especially with young people, that something preordains how they're going to be or act. Like I hate the sorting hat in Harry Potter being like, now that's who you are, nerd. Like you're going to study all the time and you're a jerk. Actually, I did not. And I know inevitably people are going to compare it to Hogwarts. It's a bummer for me personally, because it wasn't never even on my mind. And I was like, oh, I was thinking astrology. I'm gay. Like, like queer as in we don't like Harry Potter in this house. But that's okay. I mean, it's a natural thing. And certainly Harry Potter was not the first media for young people to kind of allow folks to have sense making around who they are. It's a natural human thing that we want to make sense of our identity and like align to something. And also that's why we love astrology. It's like, I don't know, tell me what is an Aries, and then I can kind of judge if that matters. So, to answer your question, I was able to kind of play with it a little. And for me, it allows you then to bring out something about a character. So if you know that they're associated with a color that is a leader, but they're super insecure and don't want to be a leader, that gives you a lot to play with, because they're going to be like, how can I possibly meet those expectations? Well, we all have a leader inside of us in any situation. And so I thought it was a cool chance to kind of push characters towards something that they're afraid of, or maybe their expectation of their family is like, you're going to be a doctor, but actually you want to be an artist. I think that's a really universal thing too. So that gives you that to play with as well. But yeah, again, like not super set in stone, like now you are this, therefore, whatever.
Can you tell us, like, if you ever get into like the green color campus, like, are you going to be going with the like 6th Ranger newcomer route, or like, I feel like green has been so like one of the most versatile colors over the years that like I've been keeping an eye out for that one.
I will say the green color of the spectrum is a very central through line throughout this series, but I can't tell you how or why. But as you know, issue 3 will be out next month for me. Right now it's November recording this, so issue 2 just dropped, I believe, yesterday.
And
I think you'll have that question answered pretty rapidly as we're moving through the next issues. But I was really delighted when I pitched the overall arc that I was able to do what we're doing. So when you see it, I think you heard me say, but I mean, I was always like a Green Ranger fan. So mysterious.
Like even beyond like Best Ranger Tommy, they've always been kind of a favorite, since like they can be the intelligent one, like the nerd, or they can be like the comic relief of the team, or the second in command. Like I feel like most of the others have 1 or 2 archetypes, but Green they'll do kind of anything with.
And my my ingenuity, creativity, kind of wanting to do something their own way is my perception of a Green Ranger archetype in this universe, is like slightly willing to look at a problem at a different angle than maybe everybody else is, which is a really important part of a team. And, there's a risk taker element to that too, when you're not afraid to take a risk or do something a little bit differently. But I think that that's part of being a team for anyone. I loved doing the Billy short in the anniversary issue, because I also love Billy and I loved Billy. And don't say this on record on a podcast, but Billy gives me really queer vibes. I don't have the authority to make that canon, but there was something for me as a young person, even just like connecting with that actor and that character, that in hindsight, there was something to me. And again, it was that insecurity and feeling like I don't belong in this world, or like I'm not good enough, or like I'm too much of a nerd to do this or that. And so it was really fun to kind of playing with that. And so all of which to say, I think every color ranger can feel like an outsider or feel insecure. And honestly, people who are never insecure, that would be a little boring in a character. They would not have any conflict. You'd be like, good for you. I love that you just wake up every morning and never, ever have any doubt in yourself.
In your novels, you've written about ghost teens and genetically modified children. And now with the world of Power Rangers, you have access to aliens and androids and all other kinds of supernatural beings to work with. So I'm curious what kind of students and characters you're most excited to work with now that you have all this at your disposal.
It's such an interesting question, because I write fantasy, typically. And so, like you said, you can dig into some interesting versions of what it's like to be a human. But for Ranger Academy, I really wanted to dig into what it's like to be a human. And when I say human, that could be an android or an alien, but it's that sense of being a person of some sort, taking away all the powers, taking away all the quirks of whatever someone can do. What is at the heart of us is a desire to connect with others in many ways. And that was actually the most important to me. What I loved playing with more so than types of characters is just the technology and building the campus. And, we'll get into the battle matrix, which is kind of like the danger room of the Ranger Academy. I was like, can we have a danger room? And so getting to play with that sense of that you can create any environment, which I loved about Star Trek. I love it when it shows up in anything. I'm not the first person to make a danger room. I love simulations. I love that we can bring in Rangers from anywhere in the Zordon tube, so they can just be, so that was actually what was most exciting for me when it comes down to like different types of humanoids and whatever. To me, that it's about the character. So I don't get as excited about what powers do they have or how do they look different. That I think it's really fun actually to see what Joe says. If I'm like, this person is an alien, to me, they're just their character. But then Joe, who is just an absolutely brilliant artist, and she has now it's like she mind reads. I actually can write less in a script about like Sage has a shocked look on her face because she can't believe that this happened. That is becoming more and more shorthand as we go along, because Joe understands these characters on like on a molecular level that is incredible to me. But there have been times where I will say, do what you want here now. And then what Joe does is amazing. So sometimes it's the art perspective that is the most fun when you talk about different humanoids and different types of villains or people.
Now, I know we probably can't reveal specific characters here, but I would like to know if you have particular established characters in mind that you're looking forward to pulling from, or even like particular seasons that you might not have grown up on, but at least like have caught your eye concept-wise.
Yes, I think that you will see, kind of connected to what I teased at with Mathis. Some folks have family members that may be recognizable depending on which seasons that you've watched or which comics that you've read. I think that it was fun to play with the villain that we're playing with, which will be recognizable, I assume, to everyone. So that was really fun. But honestly, for me, it was less like I personally would love to see this cameo. I want to delight fans. I'm a fanish person at heart. So again, that was collaboration with my editor to say, hey, I want to bring in a well-known Pink Ranger here and with these qualities. Can you help me dig into the annals and the lore? Whatever that is, whoever that is. I've had, again, just the privilege of working with Daphne is incredible because I can literally schedule a call with her and say, look, I need this. I've looked at the wiki, which is such a well-maintained and organized fandom.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that I can just go, oh, I need to know what this villain, like, what does their weapon look like for the scene in the battle matrix? I can like go in the wiki in 5 seconds and find it. So like kudos to this extremely organized fandom. But ultimately I have Daphne and Hasbro and, the ability to kind of go, hey, what can I do or who can I and insert? And again, for me, it's more about, I hope it makes somebody happy.
Now, I know you've got Daphne and the editorial team and Hasbro on your side, but I am curious if you have much communication with Melissa Flores for the mainline Power Rangers book, or like if there's any like attempted brand synergy there.
No, this is running completely separate. I do also work with the editor who has taken over that book. Or at least we chat, but there is this is existing very much in its own lane. And you did see the Billy short in the anniversary special, but it still was in its own kind of Ranger Academy lane. I have, I said I try not to look at anything on the internet. I saw like light speculation of folks wondering if it tied into blah 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 anything. This is really its own standalone story, and I think it's not meant to be like a multiverse situation, but I do love that in Rangers, because you have so much coexisting that, there isn't like one linear timeline where you're like, oh, this has to be directly at this year and this time in this quadrant of space. It's sort of floating on its own path.
One thing that I've noticed, like even with only 2 issues out so far, I've seen that you're clearly taking to the medium of comics better than a lot of other prose writers I've seen tried their hand at the medium. And I'm just not seeing the same pitfalls in this book so far of like overwriting, too much dialogue and action scenes, or like not enough reliance on the artist or their artwork to also tell the story. What would you say has helped you like stay out of those most common mistakes and like put together such a tight book that isn't like overly wordy coming from a prose writer?
I was a poetry major in college 4,000 years ago. So you learn an economy of words when you're writing poetry. You have very limited space to work with. And that was the first kind of creative writing that I did outside of, writing fan fiction in a math notebook in 4th grade. It took me a long time to ramp up to writing prose. And I also wrote plays. I'm putting that in air quotes, listeners. I wrote plays in high school just for myself, which were, I think, like just, I don't know what they were, but they were very dialogue driven. It was just really dialogue. It was like, I want to chase an emotional beat with dialogue. And so I did have that working in my favor. And that was actually one of the things that when Boom reached out, it was, like you have a style of your prose that isn't like really dense. It's actually kind of light. And when I'm working on prose, my editors are often like, buddy, what is this character thinking? Like you need to expand on it a little more. I'm like, the reader can figure it out. And they're like, no, the reader is a child. So can you please make that more explicit? But that said, the first draft of Ranger Academy, we started this book very early to give myself, the artist, the whole team time to get it right. So uncommonly early for comics. And I'm so grateful to be given that long runway, because I revised that first issue like 6 times. And the first one was like a full rewrite. So I also had the privilege of having an incredible mentor in my editor who is really, really good at saying what's not working and not solving the problem for me. Just saying, hey, this isn't working. I'm gonna let you go back and try to fix it. And one of the problems early on was a little bit too many panels on a page. Basic stuff, too much work, too much, dialogue in this bubble or whatever. So it was a collaborative effort. I think it's a mix again of like starting off with dialogue and poetry for me, reading comics, that's like imprinted in my brain from reading comics, like bringing that back out of my subconscious. And then again, having like incredible guidance and patience, because wow, the first draft of the first issue was bad. But that's everything is. I think if you talk to certainly an author of books, they're going to tell you that the first draft they wrote was garbage. And so I'm really happy to have been given a long runway, because the turnaround is tight once you're on, the turnaround is tight for us now. It's a normal cadence, but now I don't suck anymore. So it's easier. But thank you. That's really complimentary, by the way. It's really lovely to hear that, because I was terrified to do this.
I think we're in the middle of a period in comics that I think is really suitable for poets or people with a lot of history in writing poetry, since I've just noticed the tendency to have like some kind of like poetic through line, whether that be like an actual children's poem or a conversation between two characters or some kind of like children's story that then each page kind of represents the themes of as it's telling like an A and B plot. Like I found that starting with that through line often makes building all the imagery around it so much easier, or at least helps me get across like what's the big emotional takeaway I want from this book, and how do I explore this world within the realm of one central conversation.
Yes, I love everything you're saying, 100%.
So yeah, I think maybe some of that poetry background is definitely coming to the forefront with this.
I'm glad, and I think writing a novel is essentially, let's say that's 12 or 20 issues or something. Like, Fragile Remedy could have been a graphic novel. The similarity, like you said, is for Ranger Academy. The first thing I did is lay out the themes, lay out the macro view of the plot, and the acts is the story in 4 acts. And then what are the through lines? And for me, it's always all about the emotion. It's not about, how is this battle going to look, or like, what is the fighting going to be? And I think a part of that is the growing up when I was reading X-Men, it was about relationships to me. It was relationship strife. I mean, the heart of like Magneto and Xavier being like sort of the heart of the whole story of like opposing ideologies, but people who love each other, however you want to perceive that love, to me is like such a heart of the story. But then you have these evolving and shifting friendships and relationships within that. And again, those themes that come up so often are self-acceptance and looking for connection. And that's what resonates with me. So I'm happy to hear that might resonate with readers too.
Now, you've mentioned how much of a like collaborative and team effort this has been. I'd like to know what your process has been like working with Joe Mi-kyung, and like they've honestly been they've been doing incredible work with your script so far. So like, what's
incredible.
What's your first like collaborative process with an artist look like for your stories?
It's wild because we're in different time zones, we're in different parts of the world. Joe is in Korea. Joe had worked with Boom on other books, but had never worked with me. I have, commissioned art, but certainly never worked with an artist. And so we have never had a real-time conversation. It's almost like these love letters getting sent in back and forth across the globe, because I will get the art and then pass on an email like, I'm this blowing my mind. And then they'll be like, I got this script and I'm so excited. I like drew it all very quickly because I was so excited. So we're like fanning over each other from across the world. And that's honestly, it's an interesting collaboration because it feels telepathic. Like we have not hashed anything out. Things have just landed in a way that's like incredible. And like I said, I have to give Joe far less direction now as far as I am in the run. I will say the most fun collaboration, this is the tiniest spoiler, but there's a prom issue down the road, because I love a dance and I love outfits. And I spent hours picking everyone's outfits and hours, all these references. So I do give Joe, collaboration wise, I give Joe a lot of references, but I had forgotten a character, and she got to draw in the issue, and she had written back like that I didn't get a description on this person's outfit. And I asked my editor, can I just let Joe do whatever Joe wants on this one? Kind of like an Easter egg, just no direction at all. And it's such the fit. It's really good. So like those are little fun collaborative moments where I got that art and I was just like screaming, like, yep, that's perfect. No notes at all. So it's been really magical. It's really been a magical experience. Truly, to see someone understand so well these characters and have so much affection and love for them. Every panel, and I think that she gets better throughout the run. Like she starts out strong and then just becomes like supernaturally strong. But you can really see that she's feeling the feelings that I'm feeling when I'm writing, and there's like real alchemy in that I'm just freaking delighted about.
As for like pulling from other work or just like your own comic knowledge and background, I'd love to know what comics you're currently reading and like what comics you try to take inspiration from when writing a book like this.
Ooh, I'm not reading anything right now. And you may have heard, I've said this in other interviews, but I don't read in my genre when I'm drafting because it makes me feel anxious about even like subconsciously kind of stealing something. So I'm on like a comics fast right now. And honestly, I read more graphic novels than monthly comics, to be honest. I have teens who were tweens before, and so Witch Boy, Amulet, like more kind of full-length stories are what's popular. Nimona in our household, a lot of queer graphic novels, The Prince and the Dressmaker, things like that have been more popular for me and in my household. It's been a long time since I had a file, so yeah. I know that I'm always like very self-conscious to say this because there are certain, opinions that someone doesn't deserve to be writing a book or deserve to be part of a community if they're not like actively, picking up a file every week or able to rattle off this or that. But it's the same when I'm writing a YA fantasy or like a contemporary. I stay off that genre until I'm done drafting, sometimes till I'm done revising. The nice thing about comics is this isn't like a 4-year process like it is for a novel. So when I'm done, I'm done. But I think I also draw a lot of inspiration just from, TV and film and things like that, and just the kind of visuals that I love, in terms of how things are blocked. And again, I've set my age, but I've been in, creating and consuming media for a long, long time, to the extent where who even knows what is influencing me anymore. I was really into like the Jim Henson sort of Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal as a really young person. And I do think if anything left in like an indelible influence on me, it is that darkness, that there's like joy and adventure within darkness, but we're not afraid to scare the shit out of young people. I mean, the Jim Henson children's films in the 80s were deeply scary. And to go back to your question about how not talking down, I mean, I just grew up in the age where we were just killing everyone's parents in the first 3 minutes of a film, or, horrible violence was happening. And so I'm like, yeah, we're fine. You'll be all right.
As you like go forward in your novel writing career as well, like what do you think you're going to take from your experience writing comics, and like how is that going to shape your writing style going forward?
I want to keep writing comics. So that's been the first huge takeaway. Is I started out going, I don't know if I can do this. I have an anxiety disorder. I was like losing sleep. Like, I'm not going to do good. This is going to be bad. And so now I have the confidence to say, not just I can do it, but I'm like, love it. I love it. It's so much fun. I love starting off. I do a beat sheet page by page. I love writing my beat sheet. I love looking at it. And I'm learning like how to really maximize a page turn and things like that. Like, we're there, we know things now. So a big takeaway is that I really want to write more comics, and writing Sage, I really want to write a middle grade novel now. So that's been another, like, what I am enjoying, this tumultuous kind of preteen, late tween age. And it does make me want to write middle grade. So I think those are the two bigger influences. The next novel I'm working on is quite, it's YA, it's quite grown up. It has a throuple. It's like very romantic. It's nothing like Ranger Academy. So it'll be fun to switch gears and enter the editorial stage on that. But I definitely want to keep tapping into this age group, and then like especially the passion of those first main friendships that you have, those formative friendships, I think are really special.
Now, before we start wrapping up, I did want to at least touch on your next novel that I see is advertised on your site. What can you tell us about A Wild Flame Rises?
A Wild Flame Rises is a pro-environmental, anti-capitalist adventure, queer adventure set in a kind of alternate industrial revolution era, where our main character, Josephine, has grown up actually in kind of a school where she's been taught to hone a type of magic that is similar to electricity. And when graduates graduate, they're sent off into missions to bring electricity essentially to rural areas. And, it's through that story and that framework that Josephine learns that maybe what she was taught was good is actually bad for the environment, bad for people. So it's sort of that reckoning, which is a theme I love in teen fiction, is like the reckoning of who I thought I was is not me. Who am I really? Who am I if you strip away the parameters that have been put around her? So she was taught not to have close relationships. She was taught not to have friendships or romance. And here she immediately falls in love. She had a secret girlfriend in the school. Everybody's bi in this book, essentially, or queer. And so there's like a boys who are exes and then her. So we have this like queer platonic sort of also poly triad thing happening. I like to pitch it as there was only one carriage, but they do have a bit of a road trip. It's in the middle of, we're early in the production. It's written, but it's going to go through a lot of revisions. But I'm really excited about it because it is swoony. It has high stakes. And I do love a throuple, and you don't see it that often in YA. It's not like, and when I say throuple, I think people hear, oh my God, there's going to be a threesome on page. And that's not what I mean. But I do think that relationships are messy and complicated and cool, and that queer people get to define their own relationships. And I wanted to depict that like no one is going to pin these kids down and say, define this. Who is with who? What are the rules? Like, no. Just let them vibe in their carriage together.
I have a lot of friends that'll be very glad to hear that. So eagerly waiting now. But I like to close each episode with 2 fun questions tailored toward the subject matter. So what I've got for you is a 2-parter today.
All right.
I'd like to know which character of your story of Ranger Academy that you identify with most, and what color campus you think you would fall under in the Ranger Academy.
I'll start with the easy question. I'm a green girly, gender non-specific, all the way. So that one was easy.
Green's kind of become like the unofficial queer color of Power Rangers. Like our first lesbian Ranger's green. Tommy's got, maybe I'm just a trans girl that identifies with Tommy a lot, but come on.
Yeah. And, and again, it gets back to like what I was saying earlier is I believe that there shouldn't be limitations placed on media. Like the reader should get to claim that. They want to claim if green's a queer color now, like nobody could stop you from saying that or feeling that. So good for you. But definitely what attracts me to green, at least the way I see it, is that like I'm going to do something just slightly different. And there is something queer about that that idea of like, there is a status quo, but maybe I'm going to change it, or maybe I'm going to be creative and try to solve a problem in a different way. But who I relate to the most probably is Sage. My mom read the first issue on Free Comic Book Day. She's never read a comic in her whole life. She read it in the car with me on a road trip. And she was like, this is you. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, it's not like a self-insert. But I think that there's something about her really big feelings that I relate to when I was that age, in terms of like, really, if I was mad, I was like mad. And if I was whatever, it was just like to 11 on every, I think we see Sage go to an 11 on every human emotion possible. And I do relate to that. But Lindy, I also relate to because I was a really studious kind of straight A kid who was very, very hard on himself. And I think that I also relate to that. And Lindy, she has very high expectations for herself and maybe doesn't believe that she can achieve them. And she also loves to learn and loves books, and she's a nerd. So I relate to that with Lindy as well. So kind of a blend of Sage and Lindy.
All right. Well, if you're comfortable plugging your social media, Maria, where can my audience find you?
Cool. I'm Maria Mora Writes on Instagram, and I am on Blue Sky. Maria Writes on Blue Sky. I'm not really using it that much. I have a Twitter, but I'm not even going to share it because I'm not logging into it or doing anything there. But so Instagram, it really is the best way to find me. If you DM me asking for spoilers, you know who you are. I will ignore them, but I would love to otherwise connect with you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Maria, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and I really can't wait to see what else Ranger Academy has in store for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all those really thoughtful questions.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for comics or creators you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Transcending Comics Instagram and Facebook page, on Twitter as @TranscendComics, or email us at transcendingcomics@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to Ray Day Parade for designing our logo. Our intro and outro music this week is A Little Soul and You've Been Starring by Carlson. Check out their new single on Spotify, iTunes, and most other music platforms. Join us again next week as we continue transcending boundaries and exploring the colorful world of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer representation in comic books of all kinds. As the curtains fall on this episode of Transcending Comics, remember that comics have the power to inspire change in countless worlds, including our own. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep transcending.